Alright, so if you've ever played or watched anybody play Apex Legends, I'm sure you've heard of a character called Wattson. Now, she's best girl to me, but to a lot of people, they're not too fond of her. And there can definitely be controversy surrounding how people actually play her. But either way, she's still more popular than... Wait, what? But anyway, like I said earlier, a lot of people's problem with Wattson tends to stem from how people play her and not necessarily any issues with the character themselves. And I'll admit myself, as a Wattson main with a lot of time put into her, that might have sounded a little crazy, but y'all get what I meant. The way some of y'all play her gets the fuck on my nerves too. I can't even lie.
That's not how the game is played. You can't do that.
So if you saw the title of this video and clicked on it, let's be real, your fences are probably ass, and I'm not saying that to talk shit on y'all. My fences were ass when I first started using Wattson too. It takes a little bit to get used to the mechanics of fencing itself, so I can't necessarily blame y'all for using them strictly for perimeter security. With that being said, today we're gonna get offensive, or defense, y'all get what I mean. Anyway, we're going to talk about fences, what to think about when you're using fences, why you want to use them, and the different types of fences that there are. Now, I want to preface this by stating that this is my personal fence philosophy, so if you think of things differently or if you come out of this video not necessarily agreeing, that's fine. We don't necessarily have to see a skill or an ability in a video game the same way. But for people who use Wattson and see all the crazy stuff on YouTube and TikTok and Twitch and think for some reason that it's completely unattainable for them, we're going to talk about some different ways in which to use your fences, and hopefully by the end of the video I'll have given you something to take home and practice and ponder on, and hopefully you can get better at your fences in the future. Oh yeah, and I tried to make this video a really entertaining, interactive experience, but if you're just here for the information and just want the tidbits of wisdom, one thing that I did do is include a lot of chapters and sections in this video that you can skip directly to. Don't get me wrong, I'd appreciate it if you stuck around for the whole video, but if you just want the words of wisdom, I got you covered. So with all that being said, let's get defensive or offensive or whatever. Let's just get started. Now, when we're talking about fences, I like to separate them into two main categories with two subsections for each. So for the two main categories, we have pre-planned fences and combat fences. And since we're going to be talking more about combat fences, let's start off with the pre-planned fences and get those out the way. For pre-planned fences, you can use them for either deterrence and recon, or you can use them to pounce on an enemy when he drops into the correct spot. For combat fences, we got instinctual fences and direct fences. And I know this might sound like a lot, but don't worry, we're gonna break it all down. So one thing that's widely known about Wattson is using her fences for deterrence, but I think one thing that's often overlooked is the ability to use her fences for recon as well. So as you see here, when you place fences, you get these shapes on the map, these little dots and lines. If you place fences in an area where someone has to break them to cross through, you can keep an eye on those shapes on the map, and when they're broken, that gives you recon and a little bit of info that there's people behind you, and you need to pay attention to it. This is one thing that I don't think I've really ever seen anyone talk about with Wattson, and it's kind of unorthodox, but at the same time, like I said, using it correctly and using it strategically can give you some recon as to what's going on around you. And it's just something small that, while it's not exactly the most impactful thing, can definitely be something that'll help you up your game sense. And that's something that we'll be talking about in a future video, but your game sense in the game period is one of the things that's going to help you get better at doing all this either way. So let's speed run these tips real quick. For deterring people who are on your ass when you're trying to evade them, you usually want to drop a node at your feet and then another one when you get through the door, because if you do it like this the opposite way, it's just going to look clunky and weird and you're going to get yourself killed. Another thing to keep in mind, and I see y'all do this a lot and I don't know why it makes sense to y'all, stop making these little ass fences that are right next to the door. You see how easy it is to slightly poke your head in there and shoot that fence node? You're not really deterring anybody by doing that. What you need to be doing is these long fences like this, because when you make the fence that long, a person has to peek their head in a lot more to be able to even see the node, let alone shoot it. And that gives you a lot bigger of a hitbox and opportunity to punish someone for trying to do that. Trap characters are designed to punish people for putting themselves in bad situations, almost like a fighting game. A fighting game punish, you can think of it in that regard. And one of the most fun things about traps on this game is that you don't even have to catch somebody in the stun to technically trap them. But either way, the fence has its use, because you don't want them to just be able to waltz through and pop 2 bullets in the node and just walk in the room, do you? This also works really well in wide open areas too. The farther out they have to extend themselves to be able to see the node, the closer they are to the fence themselves, and the more opportunity and position you have to shoot out at them. Now, when it comes to nodes, one thing you always want to keep in mind is that if you connect 2 fences to the same node, if that one node is destroyed, that means both of those fences are gone, like so. So one thing you can do in areas like this or in certain doorways is set your nodes up in an X pattern so that it confuses the enemy on which one to even shoot, and it can kind of be like magical hats from Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if they do shoot one of the nodes, it can end up being the wrong one and set them up for a trap that you just had waiting for them. This is one of those things that goes into kind of playing mind games with people when it comes to Wattson and her fences. Certain fence shapes and things like that will have people confused on which node to even shoot, and it's highly likely that they won't end up getting the right one in the first place. But at the end of the day, those cookie cutter, basic, one-line fence patterns that you might see are very rarely something that you should actually be using, because it's really easy to look at those and just see, oh, shoot one or two of these nodes and I can get through this door. But if you ever walked up to a building and you saw a pattern of fences that looked like this, let's be real, you would probably just avoid the whole building entirely, wouldn't you?
That's deterrence.
So for like elevator shafts and that one hole at cage, you basically just always want to do a triangle pattern over the hole, because either way they're going to end up hitting the fence when they come out. Oh yeah, and if you're confused on how I snap my fences back so fast, on controller it's left trigger, on PC it's something I would not know since I don't have a PC. I apologize for that. So maybe someone in the comments can tell y'all. Probably a left click or something like that, I don't know. Now for deterring people pushing you on buildings, this one can be a little bit tricky because you think, oh, you just gotta fence the sides and make sure nobody climbs up and shoots you, right? Well, that might be the case if this was Call of Duty, but this is Apex Legends or Vertical Legends, where we have about 18 different characters that can get more height than Tony Hawk at the press of a button. And depending on when you're watching this, we now have a copycat kit ability LTM mode thing where anybody can get an Octane jump pad or an Ash portal or a Horizon lift and just get on top of a roof. So just because you fence the outside of the roof, that doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. Now, one thing about roofs and the top of buildings, if someone tries to push you up there, you want to make it with your fences as punishing as possible and as difficult for them to actually be up on that roof as possible. You and your teammates can just run through the fences and they arm and disarm. So creating a pattern that punishes them and makes it a lot more difficult for them to move around if they jump up on the height is a lot better option than you just fencing the perimeter and leaving the middle of the top of the building open for them to jump up, Horizon lift, Vantage, Octane, thingamajigger, and just kill your whole team because you weren't paying attention, because you thought that you had the middle free and you paid for it. So deterrence fencing, pretty easy to understand, right? Whether you're running away, whether you're holding a building, you want to make it so that the enemy doesn't even want to try to push in, let alone actually try to push in. And with that being said, let me finish it off with another little tip that I have for deterrence fencing that can really help you in this regard. So one thing you'll notice if you've ever watched me play, if I'm in a position where I'm up against a rock or a building or we're on low ground or something like that, and there's an open area for someone to overextend and wide swing us, I'll usually drop my fences in a triangle or in a diamond pattern or something like that around that area to make it so that if an enemy wants to push us, they either have to drop down in the little pocket of space that we have, which makes it easier to fight them. They have to drop down onto one of my fences, which makes it easier to fight them, or they have to overextend into the open and I can use cover and probably get the kill there. But one thing this also does, if enemies are overzealous and they're hyped to push you, they can drop down onto your fences before they even come up and arm. Doing it not only serves as deterrence, but sometimes it can actually serve as you dropping a fence on top of someone too, when they don't even realize that you're doing it. Deterrence fencing at its core is what Wattson's tactical is supposed to be. It's perimeter security. It's blocking an entrance or an area for enemies to be able to easily pass through it. However, perimeter security and deterrence is one of the things that, while it's the reason why people hate Wattson, I feel like is often seen as the only way to use Wattson's tactical. And I'm here to show you there's so much more that you could do with it. Another thing I like to do, since we're on the topic of deterrence with fences, I like to use them mid-fight, pre-fight, whatever, to deter enemies from going a certain way. And I kind of liken it to herding cattle. If you put your fences in one direction, especially in the middle of a fight, a lot of times enemies won't even waste their time trying to break the nodes, because trying to break nodes on this game can be a difficult task depending on if you can actually see them or not. I will admit that. The herding cattle strategy can definitely be an easy way for you to zone enemies into one area and, say, throw grenades into the area they're forced to be in. Basically, you're forcing people into a series of unfortunate events. Either take damage, run through the fence, run out into the open, where the only option that they have is a bad one. Since we're on the topic of punishing people for bad decisions, let's discuss what does that the best and talk about web fences. Now, the thing about web fences is I tend to like to compare them to a spider catching someone in his web or a lion pouncing on someone at the perfect time. an animal, not someone. Y'all get what I mean. The distinction with web fences, you usually have a node already set up. You have another node just out waiting to be placed down. You're waiting for the enemy to drop down to a good position so that you can pounce. And as soon as they do, you drop that fence and you clip them immediately. This is what web fences are, and it's one of the easiest ways to get into fencing enemies because it's one of the freest. You're basically just waiting for someone to drop down into a spot, you drop a fence, and people naturally strafing back and forth or moving around in the area that they're in is going to make them eventually walk into the fence. That's when you strike. Another thing that you could do with this method is something that I like to call sit fencing, and my bad for having to name everything. It's just how I keep track of stuff. Basically what this is, you set up a web of fences, and then with the central node or one node that's connecting to most of the nodes, you sit on top of that node and wait for someone to come in. Now, this is a tactic that I don't necessarily like using too often because it feels kind of cheesy, but if I can do it very quickly and someone's pushing me and they're confident about pushing into this room, they're gonna end up eating a fence or 2 or 7. But now that I think about it, one thing with that, and if you do play a lot of solo no-fill, which I've been doing a lot more recently, check me out on stream if you want, this strategy can work well if you're playing a map with a lot of buildings. Let's face it, if 3 people see one person by themselves, they're all gonna go ape them and then teabag the death box and feel like they all did something. So catching enemies like that in a trap, and when they force themselves into a room and FBI open up the door, if you can buzz all of them and stun all of them with a web of fences, you might be able to clip 1 or 2 of them and move. And getting those quick clips in combination with being able to move and reset is what's going to help you win those fights, especially when you're alone. Now, using web fences correctly depends a lot on using things like audio cues, which, oh boy, I don't even need to get into audio in this game, but for lack of a better term, I guess, you got to use the audio cues around you, what little of them there are, to make an informed decision on when to drop that node, when the enemy is going to drop down or be near you, close enough for you to stun them and get the clip. And that's pretty much it for pre-planned fences. I don't think I can really do much more to summarize that. The deterrent and the recon fences are for exactly that, deterring an enemy from pushing you through a doorway or an area, or using them for recon and keeping an eye on your map in order to determine where enemies are in relation to around you. I don't think either one of those need any more explanation at this point, but if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask in the comments. I'm here to help y'all. That's the whole point of me making this video. But with that being said, let's move on to the full course meal of the video, which y'all have actually been waiting for. Let's talk about the combat fences. As I said earlier, your combat fences might be a little ass. That's to be expected. I was the same way when I first started, especially with the way the fence nodes work and fences work themselves. There's a little bit to understand before you even get to the point of trying to drop fences on people's heads. So let me take y'all into the firing range where we're gonna break it down step by step, and I'm gonna get y'all ready to go drop some fences on somebody's head. So one of the things that I see that's a common misconception with combat fencing is how and where to actually place the nodes. And as you can see here, if someone is in front of you or blocking you, you cannot place a node behind them. So what you have to do to mitigate this, as you see me doing, is jump over them. That's the only way that you're going to be able to get the node behind them in order to be able to successfully fence them as such. Now, if you've ever played Wattson or seen anyone talk about Wattson on Reddit, Twitter, anything like that, you've probably heard complaints about how you can place her nodes and the collision detection and everything on the game blocking them. People are one of those things. So as you can see, the only way to be able to successfully drop a node behind someone is to be higher than them. This is another area where height gives you an advantage in this game. As long as you are at a higher position than your enemy, be that jumping, standing on a ledge, falling out of the air, etc., you'll be able to successfully place a node behind them, and it'll enable you to get the fence off. Next up, let's talk about corner fencing. Now, placing Wattson nodes on this game is incredibly fast. You can place 2 before an enemy can even see you come around the corner. So one thing I like to do if I'm using a corner for cover in this game, I'll drop a node in the doorway, I'll drop another 2 around the corner where the enemy is, and 9 times out of 10, it'll, if not hit them, corral them into a position where it's a lot easier for me to see them and get a kill. This goes into the herding cattle section that I talked about earlier. Using your fences to make your enemies go into an area where it's easy for you to get the clip or it's easy for you to see them in your line of sight can be a highly effective way to use your fences. Corner fencing can be risky depending on how you do it, and sometimes I go the risky route on purpose, but at the same time, coming out of a door and around a corner with a fence node already ready to go can get you in a good position to easily drop a fence on top of someone, and if they're unable to turn to the side because you just stunned them, then that gives you an easier fight. One thing to be cognizant of too, there's a couple things in this game that you can end up doing that'll make you put your node away unintentionally. Mantling down a wall, trying to climb something by accident. All of these things you need to be careful of, or you'll end up like this.
You stupid.
Oh, why did it put my node fucking up? So do keep in mind, and if you're a Wattson main, taking a couple minutes in the range to go over what different things you can do that will enable you to keep your node out and keep fencing may help you in the long run. So when we're talking about height and height being necessary to you dropping fences on top of people, another thing to be cognizant of, I know cognizant, that's the word of the video, is that you can place fences up from a height that you may not expect. And this can also be another tactic that you can effectively use to fence people who sometimes don't even know you're there. I use this sometimes when teams are hunkered inside of a building and don't want to leave or want to keep running out and shooting up in the sky. You can drop a fence on top of someone as they walk outside of the door, and it'll leave them none the wiser and all the more dead. Now, there are somewhat slight exceptions to the rule as far as dropping nodes around people or behind someone, but this usually is more of a, for lack of a better term, a fluke. So this is something that while you can somewhat attempt it, it's a lot more risky than just jumping over someone or jumping around someone and dropping a fence on top of them. As you can see me doing here though, this is another method that is kind of akin to the herding cattle that I talk about. Spreading fences around someone, especially with the way people tend to strafe on this game, it's very easy to get someone caught up in a fence because they're likely going to move into it not knowing that it's there. And one thing you have to remember about fences, they take a little second for them to actually pop up and arm after you drop the nodes and connect them. So you can drop a fence next to an enemy and they'll strafe into it and not even know it's there until after it arms on top of them. That's one thing to keep in mind with fencing. You have to use the psychology of when the nodes arm and things like that against people. This makes me think of a great comment I got recently that really puts Wattson into perspective. Playing her is like playing chess, a mini game of node placement, fence predicts, stun aggros, anchoring, etc, etc. Now this is actually a really good point, and why, contrary to popular belief, unless you're just sitting behind Wattson fences, if you ask me, Wattson has a higher skill ceiling than a lot of the other characters in the game, especially because her abilities boil down to more than just use, wait to recharge, use again, and things of that nature. A lot of people that don't play Wattson don't necessarily understand the nuances of the nodes taking the nodes taking however long the arm and pop up and things like that. If you don't play Wattson, you're not kin to that at all. So that's something that you could use against people and use to your advantage and make it a lot easier for you to catch people in those fences. Now, I will say for corralling combat fences, it works a lot better if you have high sensitivity and you move fast like you notice I do. Because even though you're running at unarmed speed when you're running with your fence node out, if someone is good, or like all the PC players like to talk about, have aim assist, they're gonna clip you trying to run past them because they're gonna end up locked onto you. So one thing you need to do with that type of strategy is to make sure that if you're not as fast-paced or as fast of a mover, you're doing it between cover or doing it jumping over a box or something to give you some type of edge or mobility, so that if you don't necessarily make it correctly, you can jump behind some cover and get back to shooting. So let's use this clip for an example. As you can see, we're in dire straits right now. We don't have too much cover. They got height, everything on us. One of my teammates gets dropped. Me jumping out, sliding out, and dropping this fence. You notice how there's this box right here that I dropped behind immediately after I dropped the fence? If the fence didn't hit, I would have been able to use that in multiple ways to use that cover to be able to get an edge in the fight. If you notice, I give myself multiple escape routes too. I got a couple low ground options here. I could swing left around the boxes and go down the hole, or just drop down on the ground below. Now, if the fence had failed, one thing that I could have did was play cover and try to get Octane as he swung around the corner and kill him, or climb up on the box, drop behind him, and kill him by shooting him in the back of the head. And that all goes to show with how I always say, these fights are dynamic. So even though the only thing you're focused on is offense, or technically on fence, because you're trying to drop a fence on their head, you get what I'm saying. Make sure to focus on defense too, because you don't want to be stuck in a bad situation where you just have no way to get out because you wanted to be Mr. TikTok clip. Dropping fences on heads is fun, but if you gotta die to do it, then is it really, I'll leave that to y'all to decide. Now, one thing that I've gotten a comment about before, and is honestly one of the funniest comments that I've ever gotten regarding this game, there was a guy one day who was like,
how can you call this fencing? You're just spamming the fence button, blah, blah, blah.
And while there is somewhat some merit to what they were saying, at the same time, what they don't realize is that when I'm doing that, a lot of times I'm doing that on purpose. Now, when it comes to the difference between straight spamming fences in an area and deliberately trying to make a shape with your fences, the first tactic most of the time works good enough as to where you don't necessarily need the second. But at the same time, if you want to be Picasso with your fences, one easy trick to do is doing like how you see me do here and caging someone in a fence. This is one of the times where you can get a fence node behind someone, which also probably has to do with them strafing, and you can get a fence node to the side of them at the same time. So with the way people move, it's very likely that they're going to end up moving into the fence. And if they don't, in this case, you usually still have a node left that you could use to connect from one of your existing nodes and drop on top of them. And this is really just one of those strategies where if you're trying to have fun with fences and not necessarily all hyped to get the kill, because this isn't something that I use unless I'm really, like I said, trying to have fun. As you can see, this looks funny, and catching somebody with this in game can give you a can definitely be entertainment. All right, so I've given you some of the basics on when fences work, why they work, how to drop them around people, things like that. So let me show you combat fencing in action and show you how you can successfully use these to your advantage in the game.
Hello, motherfucker.
Surprise, motherfucker. Gotcha, bitch.
Now, instinctual fences and direct fences are kind of brother and sister, but one thing that I like to think about that distinguishes them: with instinctual fences, people are coming to you and your fences. It's a reaction to someone coming to you and you being in danger. It's almost like an octopus inking. With direct fences, you're bringing the fences to them. And instinctual fences have a lot in common with web fences, but one of the main differences is you're using them instinctually in the middle of a fight, on top of an enemy or where an enemy is. You're not necessarily waiting for an enemy to get to a certain point before the fight even starts. The difference between combat fences and pre-planned fences are just that. They're used mid-combat. And the thing that distinguishes all of these fences a lot of times is usage and the time of usage, not necessarily what you do with the fences. Because a pounce fence or a web fence and an instinctual fence can end up actually being somewhat the same thing, but the difference is how, when, and the type of way that you use them. So instinctual fences are more akin to the type of stuff that we all like to watch on TikTok and things like that. As you can see with instinctual fences, I'm either baiting an enemy into a certain area or taking advantage of the area that they're in with my fences. That's how that type of thing works. If you're fast paced, if you're a fast mover, and especially because we have the advantage of Wattson being small and having a smaller hitbox, you can move around and get these nodes around and get these nodes behind people, in front of people, around people, a lot easier than you would with someone like Newcastle or Gibby or Horizon or something like that. I call it instinctual fencing because it's not necessarily something that you have in your mind until you pull out the fence node. It's the split-second decision of, oh, they're in the perfect position, let me pull out my fences and node them and get the cool kill. And I feel like instinctual fences may be the hardest one out of all of the bunch to actually master, or at the very least get novice at, because it takes a lot of split-second decision, and not trying to be like that, but even though this is a very fast-paced game, everyone doesn't think at the same speed. So some people don't necessarily get that in their mind in the middle of a fight. Oh, I could drop a fence here. Oh, they're strafing in this position, they're gonna get hit by the fence. And one thing about this combat fencing thing, one of the main things about it, is cool getting the kills and getting the clip and all of that kind of stuff, but it's just an exhilarating feeling of dropping a fence on top of someone. And that's why I love using Wattson, because there's no other character in this game that I get that feeling from other than Wattson, and dropping a fence on top of someone and being like, haha, you got stuck. So we done covered a lot of different topics today as far as fencing and how to fence people, and I hope I've helped y'all learn a lot. So without further ado, last but not least, we're gonna talk about direct fencing and how sometimes it can be an ash tether that actually works, which, wow, shocker, yeah, I know, right? Direct fences are you knowing where the enemy is, you seeing the enemy, all of that, and you bring the fence to their front door. The objective of direct fencing is for you to go into the situation, dropping the fence on them before they even know you're there or before they even are able to react to you doing it in the first place. With direct fences, you are getting the drop on an enemy and you're dropping, you know what I'm about to say. So direct fencing deals a lot with information, which I know is kind of difficult to get information on this game when everybody is running around not making noise. But at the same time, those little tidbits of information are going to be the keys that help you determine when you can actually drop a fence on someone and where to drop the fence. It's kind of like playing Battleship. I don't know, that might be a bad comparison, but
No, hold up, that actually works.
it's kind of like playing Battleship sometimes in terms of guessing where you're going to drop your fence node and getting it hit, because you can use information to make an informed decision, but at the same time, you're not always 100% sure where the enemy is. So one of the least risky ways of direct fencing is corner fencing, like how we talked about earlier. You can direct fence out of a doorway or out into an area and drop a fence on top of someone, like you saw me do earlier with the corner fence that I dropped on Ash. Corner fencing is probably the easiest way to do direct fencing, because most of the time when you're in the corner, you already know that the enemy is on the other side of the corner and they're probably trying to get into the building that you're in, trying to get around the wall, the corner, something. So you already know that they're coming towards you and you know their position. All you got to do is drop a node next to you, drop one out into the open area to connect, and then drop one around the corner. And like I said earlier, dropping fences on this game is fast as hell, period. So a lot of times you could do it before the enemy even sees you peek out. If you're holding an area where a wall is, you can fence an enemy around the wall and then jump to the other side of the wall and get behind them and shoot them that way. Things like this are just simple tactics that you can use with your fences to enable you to win more fights and get in better positions to stay alive for your fights. Because if you can't survive any longer than 10 seconds, then you're never gonna win a game, right? And as you can see, like with this catalyst clip, having that one node in the doorway or outside of the doorway can put you in prime position to drop your fence inside and get in and get the pushing. The most important part of direct fencing or combat fencing in general is getting that node in a position where you can drop one behind the enemy or to the side of the enemy or somewhere that they can end up strafing into it. So dropping a node out in the middle of the open or dropping a fence that connects out in the middle of the open isn't always necessarily a bad thing, because for one, it's going to make an enemy look at it instead of you, and that might put you in a position where you can change positions, switch spots, get somewhere where you can drop that second node and get it behind someone, get it around them, and end up getting the stun, and even better yet, the kill. And all of these are things that, while you might have a grasp of the concept of them, how to do them, the mechanics of it, things like that, it's gonna take practice and you actually getting in tune with doing it mid-fight for you to actually get good at it. Being able to drop a fence somewhere to deter someone from coming through a doorway is one thing. Rewiring your brain to think in the middle of a fight, oh yeah, I need to drop this fence right here so that they're gonna be able to walk into it and me get the kill, that's something that takes some time. Mentally, physically, muscle memorily, you get what I'm trying to say. It's not something that's gonna come easy, and it's something you're gonna have to work on and work towards before it's something that actually does end up coming like second nature to you. So some of my, I guess, principles that I like to think of when it comes to combat fencing. Number one, start your fights with fences. What do I mean by this? When you're in the middle of a fight, when you're in an area, when you're taking cover, things of that nature, you need to be dropping nodes, dropping fences, spreading things out around the area so that when you're in different positions, you already have nodes out, fences out, things like that to be able to drop fences on people. Now,
Here comes that cognizant word again.
being cognizant of the fence nodes that you have left is something that you need to be doing, and being cognizant of how long you have before you get new nodes or before your nodes recharge is something that's pertinent when you're playing the game. However, being stingy with your nodes is only going to end up putting you in bad situations, because there are a lot of times inside of rooms, inside of certain areas, where you could drop a fence just to keep someone from pushing you around the corner, and you not doing it makes it easy for them to slide down the hill and PK you, and you're just confused wondering why you even continue playing this game in the first place. So start your fights with fences and make sure that you have fences in the middle of your fights and you're using fences in your fights, even if you're not dropping them on top of people. Getting to the point of using fences mid-fight, whether you're using them on someone, using them to block a certain position or a route, things like that, get you better at just using them, period, so that when it comes time for you to drop them on people, you're already well acquainted with using them in the first place. When you play Wattson, you need to be thinking of fences and fence nodes as you would a tool, like you would a grenade or a survival item or things of that nature. Yeah, your fences are an ability, but if you want to be a combat Wattson, ew, that sounded nasty as hell. Oh my good griefs. Anyway, yeah, your fences are an ability, but if you want to be a combat Wattson, you need to be making your fences an integral part of your combat. You need to be using your fences in combat in different areas, and you need to be using them quick, fast, and in a hurry. You also need to get yourself more in tune with things like how long it takes for nodes to recharge, being able to scoop up your nodes in the middle of a fight to use them on other fences, things like that. Thinking of your nodes as something like a tool that helps you win a fight instead of something that you just use when you don't want to get pushed through a doorway because you need to hit a shield cell is critical to you becoming the type of Wattson that you wanted to be when you clicked on this video. In the first seconds of a fight, it is crucial that you are looking for places to place your nodes and to fence people, even if they walk into those positions or not. You need to be pre-planning. If they go here, I already have it set up to shock them here. If they go around this area, they can't get to me because I already have it set up to defend there. Even if you don't have the nodes set up, set it up in your head. This goes back to game sense that we were talking about earlier. Having an awareness of the area and the terrain around you and how you can use it to your advantage, and also how it can be used to your disadvantage, is something that's going to separate you from just another gnat being a gnat. So getting better with your Wattson fences boils down to mental as much as it does physical. You have to understand the mechanics and the nuances of the fences, which is what I've taught you throughout this entire video, and all the different situations that it might be pertinent to use them in. So the point I've been trying to make is Wattson is a character with a very high skill ceiling unless you want to use her to protect precious art with electric fences. Anyway, I will say if you want to get better at combat fencing, you might want to practice in a lower risk game mode like mixtape or something like that. And I will say mixtape and control is one of the main reasons why I've been able to get as good as I am with fencing. It's very easy to practice and just keep going at it over and over and over again. So if you leave this video and you feel like it's unattainable for you, get your ass in control and go practice to see how much closer you could get with just taking the time out of your day to actually try to get better at it. So I hope I've helped you understand her just a little bit more and showed you some of how you can use her to her fullest potential. But at the end of the day, being a good Wattson doesn't really mean anything if you're not a good teammate or a good player at the game. And there's a lot of things that the game just never thought to teach you that you know will help you improve exponentially. And don't worry, if you hear that and you start to think,
oh wow, I actually do want to be a good Wattson, but I don't want to be a bad teammate,
I got you covered. Check out my educational content series here, and we're going to get you on track to being the teammate that your teammates actually want on their team in game.